Hello, and welcome to Straight No Chaser with Dr. Julius Bailey. We are live from the campus of Wittenberg University, where I see U-Haul trucks and masked students all around. I am teaching a freshman seminar this fall, and we actually meet tomorrow. And boy, oh boy, is going to be something. I haven't taught since the end of February, so I'm fired up, ready to go. But look, if this is your first time here at Straight No Chaser, welcome. We are a 1 hour digital talk show where we bring you news, culture, and a little bit of knowledge. And I think today we're going to have some fun too, though. But if you enjoy what you experienced today, please like, share, and tell a friend about this. We're on Facebook. We're also on YouTube at Dr. Julius Bailey. Today closes our 13th episode, I believe, and we have 2 more to go to conclude our pilot season. We do have 3 segment sponsors for the season 2, but we need a couple more. So if you know a business or you got a rich auntie, you tell them to watch our shows and support season 2, please. We come back on September 7th with 16 more shows, and I am just excited already. Miss Tisa, we got a great show today.
Exciting.
Man, look, you've been hearing about these young folk talking about the WAP, right?
I have.
And they ain't talking about this, huh?
Right, they're not talking about
they
that.
They ain't talking
one.
about that?
Nah.
What is about the worship and praise then?
You know what? Praise might be what they do.
Bro, a friend of mine said he's talking about wings and pizza from Domino.
You know what?
They ain't talking about that.
No.
Well, later in the show, we're going to have a women's studies scholar and historian on that we might have to ask her about a WAP, if you will. But first, we have a newly arrived on the campus of my PhD home, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He came from the esteemed St. Louis University. He is now the assistant professor in the Department of Religion and Afro-American Studies. And his name is Dr. Leonard McKinnis. His friends call him Leon. Brother, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Doc. Good to see you.
Man, it's good to see you, man. Quite frankly, the last time we seen each other was for our dear friend and brother, at the cemetery, man. We miss, we both love Doug,
That's right.
And, we miss him. We pray for his mom and his wife and his children and all you Alpha brothers, man. I always tell people, I give y'all grief, man, but y'all showed out that day for his funeral, man.
Yeah, no, that was a great loss. And it's also a reminder of the devastating impact that this pandemic has had on our communities, on the Black community in particular, right? And Doug was a young man,
yes.
Left a beautiful family behind. So we do remember him during this time.
Yeah. So, man, how are you adjusting to Central Illinois?
It feels good to be home, right? As you mentioned, I'm an Illinois native, grew up on the south side of Chicago. And so when this position opened and I learned about it, I was eager to apply and put my hat in the ring. Given that my research is really sort of interested in the moment, at least, in Black religion in Chicago, this position seemed to fit well. So I'm adjusting, moved in and excited to begin the semester. I'll teach one class this year entitled Race, Religion, and Resistance.
Cool.
And we're going to take a deep dive into the intersection of race and religion and how religion can be employed potentially as a tool of resistance in the freedom struggle. So I'm really
excited. Up, man. That's what's up, man. I'm excited for that campus. I'm excited for Champaign-Urbana area, man. The only advice I got for you is don't do like me, man. I mean, because I spent all my time over at the Elks Club and and the hole in the wall, listening to Johnny Taylor and playing Tunk in Urbana, So I need you to do a little bit better than I did in my years at UIU. See, Ms. Tisa, you wanted to jump in there?
I did. Good morning, Dr. McKinnis. How are you?
I'm well. Good morning. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much. So, Doc's been bragging about you all day, and that speaks volumes because he doesn't brag just about anybody.
Sure.
But with that being stated, can you share with our audience how you and Dr. Bailey met each other?
Yeah. So beyond, being brothers in the academy, Dr. Bailey was the first Black male professor that I knew personally. I met him on the campus of Lewis University, where I was studying for my BA in political science. And he was tremendous and played a tremendous role in my development as a young student. And I remember one event in particular that really sheds light on our relationship and the impact he had on the students. There was an incident in which a professor at the university misbehaved, and that's a very gentle way of saying it, and had some very, unbecoming things to say about Black folk. And the email was directed and aimed at Dr. Bailey. And so a couple of students and myself, we organized what would have then been my first sort of mass protest around the Black freedom struggle. And with other students, we rallied behind Dr. Bailey. He brought Professor Cornell West to campus, where I had my first engagement with Professor West. So this has been a very long relationship. And certainly when I told him I wanted to go to Harvard for graduate school, he was instrumental, having had been there previously. And so, just has been a real figure for me as a young scholar.
Wow. It sounds like that relationship is founded on love, loyalty, and trust.
No, that's for sure. That's for sure. I mean, he left Lewis, he went to Harvard, and then I remember he asked me, Doc, what's some tips I gotta have going? I said, man, read the footnotes, man. You gotta read every book that's in the footnote, dog, because that's what they're gonna be talking about. Right. You know what I'm saying? And obviously, came back to Loyola. I don't know if you know this, Leon, but I almost went to Loyola. I say that because I was in seminary at Quigley South, and our Mundaline, the next step to priesthood, is a sort of a seminary from Loyola,
Sure.
but I ran into them public school girls, man, and that messed my whole priesthood life up. But that's but not about me, man. It's about you. And so let's just jump back right into it, man. We both teach Black religious history, and I believe that that may have been one of the classes I know you took with me in undergrad there at Lewis. But we know that cities like ours in Chicago, where we grew up, were overwhelmingly Catholic, in the turn of the 20th century, and metropolitan areas like Detroit and Philadelphia and Cleveland, they all sort of became sort of increasingly and progressively Protestant as Blacks sort of migrated into the cities in the early 20th century. I think about my granddad, who was a Baptist preacher. He passed away. I love him to death. But he lived on 91st and Emerald, kind of near Halsted Street. And his church was on 63rd near Halsted. And the route that we had to take, twice a week going from 91st to 63rd was right down Halsted, right? Yeah. And so on 70, once we get to 79th Street, we witnessed the brothers from the Nation of Islam, in the streets. They sell them papers, and we would buy a paper, and but we never really, I ain't gonna lie, we never really bought the bean pies, but we always bought the papers, but then, just less than a mile later, we would watch these colorfully dressed folk from the Temple of Solomon. We were like, wow, he's always good. Granddaddy, what is going on? Like, who are all these Black folk? And ain't none of them going to the Baptist church we going to, right? And I was like, what is going on? And then when I go see my grandmama, who lived over east a little bit, we would pass by the Moore Science Temple, and obviously, a Mosque Miriam on Stony Island. And so, Chicago is rich with a sort of a multiplicity of religious congregations, right? I know you had the great opportunity to study with the great Dwight K. Hopkins, and so I know you can speak on this. So let's talk a little bit about diversity within Black spiritual life.
Yeah, I mean, this is, for me, and this is where I get excited, right? This is I think the real richness and the complexity of Black religious life in North America. I think so far too often when folk think about Black religion and Black church folk, we think about Black Christianity, right? Mm-hmm. But what the story of the Great Migration reveals to us is a deep and complex narrative about the spiritual lives of African Americans. So if we consider momentarily the Great Migration, right, this mass movement of Blacks from the South to the North, who are escaping segregation, who are escaping the problems of the crops in the South, and they are migrating toward northern cities or these urban centers like Chicago and Detroit and Philadelphia and elsewhere. But when they arrive in these cities, the situation is less rosy than they imagined. And so they're facing sometimes even harsher forms of discrimination and segregation in the North. Mm-hmm. And so for many of these Blacks, they turn to the church. And in many cases, yes, it was in fact sort of mainline African-American Christianity, the Black Baptists, the Black Pentecostals, thus so on forth. But there is this story in the middle part of the 20th century that takes place in cities like Chicago, where we see the eruption of these new religious movements, these religious traditions that are thinking about the intersection of race, religion, and identity. Mm-hmm. And so if I think, for instance, about the work of someone like Arthur Fawcett, who suggested that, during this time, there's this eruption of these, what he called Black gods of the metropolis, these mm-hmm. religious sort of institutions who have become disenchanted with mainline Christianity. So it was not uncommon, Dr. Bailey, to drive in Black Bronzeville in 1930s Chicago and pass by, the Moorish Science Temple, the Nation of Islam, some Black Jew sects. But among those, and this is where my work sort of intervenes in the discourse, alongside those traditions is a story of the Black Coptic Church. And this mm-hmm. is the institution that you observed on 71st and Hosted, the True Temple of Solomon. Mm-hmm. So these traditions, like the Black Coptic Church and the Nation of Islam, are really negotiating religion and identity. And in many ways, what's happening in these institutions is a desire, what I want to call in the book, this sort of self-fashioning of themselves. So rethinking classifications about the Negro, using religious language and religious discourse to rethink what it means to be a Black person. So the Black Coptic Church in particular, where my work kind of is situated, was founded by Prophet Cicero Patterson, who migrated from Orangeburg, South Carolina, to Chicago through other cities around 1935. And he established this institution as what I call in the book, this imaginative community of individuals who are rethinking questions like homeland and Black identity. One of the sort of, I think, cementing features of these institutions is the rejection of Negro as a classifier for Black folk. So for many of these traditions, like the Black Coptic Church, the Negro was spiritually damaging. It was an invention of white supremacy to create a non-human. And so what we see happening in these institutions like the Black Coptic Church is this broader cultural turn toward Ethiopia. So it's a religious tradition that is steeped in Ethiopianism, right? So Ethiopia, as you know, Doc, during this period becomes kind of a selling feature of many Black religious institutions because of its biblical importance in the Hebrew Bible. So it was not uncommon to see institutions like the Abyssinian Church or the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. But in Chicago, you had the Black Coptic Church, which tried to imagine itself as this religious institution that builds this link between North American Blacks in America and also the sort of Ethiopian heritage coming out of Ethiopia. So that's kind of where my work situates and what I'm up to in this book, bringing this tradition to our imagination and sort of unearthing it from the ruins of history.
No, I mean, that's rich, man. That's rich work, and that's important work in the history of religious tradition. And I'm reminded of two things as you were talking. One was about the idea about the sort of the negative connotation of the Negro, right?
Yeah.
But then I also think about people like Henry McNeil Turner,
absolutely,
and then even James Cone,
yeah,
who asked the question, right? Is God a Negro?
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about them. And so you and I both spent time at Saint Sabina.
That's
and
right.
So we know that before I get to that, people have these questions around, identity and Christianity, right? You and I, of course, me and you and I know, that picture at Saint Sabina of Jesus, right? Ain't nothing white about that dude, right?
Yeah.
And we're showing it now on the screen for our audience. This is the Jesus I grew up with, right?
Yeah.
And so when James Cone asked the question about the socio-political significance of white people within the Black religious tradition, right? There is a sense to the work that you're doing with Black liberation theology that comes from that Henry McNeil Turner line, right? Into Cone, into Dwight Hopkins and others, right? In part, this is what sort of Black liberation theology is trying to respond against, right? That significance of sort of white presence in Black spiritualities. Would you agree with that?
That's right. I mean, so one of the salient features, Doc, of the work that I'm doing on the Black Coptic Church, and I have an article in which I sort of dive into this, one of the salient features that one notices when you're inside one of the temples is that the congregants in the community use the term Black Jesus, right? It is a part of the liturgy. It's a part of who they are. It is not this sort of abstract thing that they consider. So, I'm reminded, by the way, of Professor James Cone, who once in an interview was asked about the Black Messiah. And the question he was raised was very simple. Well, who is this Black Jesus? And Professor Cone suggested, well, listen, how are you going to get a European-looking Jesus in first century Palestine? You can't do that. But then he goes on to say, with white theologians, you can get almost anything out of Jesus. So what Black liberation theology does, and what the practice of the Black Messiah is about in these kind of traditions, like the Black Coptic Church, is a recovery simply of that first century nappy-headed Palestinian Jew who is Black Jesus. So Black Jesus is the Jesus of Scripture. And so when we think about what's happening, for instance, with now this call to get rid of the white Jesus, well, listen, Black religious folk have been talking about this for decades. For hundreds of years. Right. And so for me, the last vestige of the religion of white supremacy that we must get rid of is the image of the white Sophria. Because in fact, the white Christ is not merely a symbol for the religion of whiteness and the religion of white supremacy, but the white Messiah is that religious icon that somehow allowed slaveholding Christians to justify the relationship between human enslavement and Christian faith. But you can't reconcile those things. So when Black theologians and when places like the Black Coptic Church assert that we believe and we say a Black Jesus or a Black Messiah, we are only recovering the first century Palestinian nappy-headed, kinky-haired Jew who is in fact the Jesus of Scripture. So for Cone and for Black theologians, this Messiah is the one who was with our praying grandmothers, who was with people like Mark Vesey and Martin Delaney and Gabriel Prosser. I'm reminded of the work of someone, God Struck Me Dead.
God Struck Me Dead,
In the text, Clifton Johnson recounts the narrative of an ex-slave and how she converted to Christian faith. And she tells the interviewer, she says, listen, before I converted to Christian faith, I was taken to a deep sleep. I was taken to heaven. And there I saw little Black Jesus sitting on little Black Mary's lap. And guess what? She said, God was also Black. So when we talk about the Black Messiah, this is not some new invention that Sean King should remind us about. People like enslaved Africans and liberationists and Frederick Douglass and great womanist theologians have already reminded us, and they've been talking about the importance of this Black Jesus. So Black Jesus is the center of a Black theology of liberation, because that Messiah is the one who has rescued us, if you will, from the bondage of white supremacy.
Ooh, come on now,
God,
Dr.
come
McKinnis.
on, Doc. We shouldn't drink to Jesus, but we gonna drink to that. That's for sure. Man, look, man. So is that, I mean, just real quickly before we move to the next question, is that kind of when, in your writing, when you talk about practical liberation, is that kind of what you mean by that?
It is. In other words, so for me, and this is where I'm really curious about sort of lived religion, because for me, it's one thing to talk about Black religion and to sort of theorize Black religion. But Black religion is best seen, Dr. Bailey, in the religious lives of African Americans, in the religious lives of Black folk who practice Black theology. So, in 1969, as Black theology and Black power comes to fruition, what Professor Cone does is really synthesize what Black Christians had already been doing. And so when I talk about the Black Coptic tradition as an institution that is really a practical instance of liberation theology, I'm referring to the performances and the rituals and the theology that grounds the individuals in this religious institution. And that is the verbal and the public display of a Black Messiah, rejection of Christian images and Christian theology that is really a vestige of white supremacy. So yeah, I'm talking about the ways in which Black folk perform their religious life. When we perform the audacity, if you will, to perform joy, the audacity, if you will, to be free in a space that is meant to condemn us. So when I say practical Black theology, I'm really talking about the religious lives of Black folk and how they imagine and perform their religiosity.
Man, I just wish we had time for a praise break.
Okay, I know what prayer can do.
I mean, boy, you preaching for real on a Wednesday afternoon. Lord Jesus. But look, man, we got to move. I know that, oh man, he just, anyway, okay, hold on. Okay, let's get back to the interview. Oh, I get carried away here because I want to jump in on that. You know what I'm saying? But I can't jump in. You don't follow a preacher preaching. You just let him go. So, brother, in your writing, first of all, I'm sorry. For those who may have just come in, we are on with the Dr. Leonard McKinnis, who is an assistant professor of religion at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So I see some of Marla Frederick's work on ethnographic approaches to the study of religion, especially on sort of identity and images. I see a lot of her work in yours, right? Yeah. I love me some Marla Frederick, right? I mean, she's a powerhouse. She's one of those, theologians you were talking about earlier. Are you influenced by her and her work?
I am. In fact, I studied with Marla Frederick. It was Marla Frederick who introduced me to Black gods of the metropolis and the varied forms of the religious lives of African Americans. Okay. So what I gathered from someone like Marla Frederick, who is now a dear friend and mentor, is the necessity of taking seriously the ordinary people who worship in churches. Mm-hmm. So, as theologians, we're trained to pay attention to a history of dead white men, and theology as it emerges from the West. But the reason why I am so curious about ethnographic approaches to the study of religion and why I observe religious services and interview people on the ground is because I think there is so much to learn from people and how they, believe and how they practice their faith tradition. So the book that I'm finishing, Divine Blackness, Race, Religion, and Imagination in the Black Coptic Church, it is a 10-year ethnographic work. So I have really embedded myself in the community, lots of interviews, lots of observations. And for me, it also sort of expands the conversation of what we mean by epistemology, right? So how we come to know things. And so when I talk about ethnographic approaches, I am really curious, what are people doing as they practice their religion? How are they making sense of religious worlds? How do they understand the Black Messiah? Not simply from a theoretical standpoint, but as some of the folks who I work with in the Black Coptic Church, some of these queens and these prophets, I'm curious, when they say Black Messiah, what do they mean, right? What happens in their lives between Sundays? And I'll just say this, what I've learned from this book project and working with this community is the way in which religion is not merely, Dr. Bailey, a set of practices that manifests on Sunday, but how and in what way religion can become a way of life. And we see this kind of discourse in the Nation of Islam, in the Moorish Science Temple, as these ordinary people, as one of my interview subjects suggested. She says, on Sunday, Prophet Cicero told me I was a queen, but she said, listen, I wasn't just a queen on Sunday.
On Sunday.
There are ways in which these religious imaginations influence and impact the ordinary lives of people every day of the week. So for me, getting on the ground and talking to these people allows us to see how religion is shaped and formed and how people live it as a way of life.
Right.
And Marla Frederick taught me that.
Man. So you've had some rich support. And quite frankly, I'm sitting up here. I told her I'm excited for him, and he just made me proud. My chest getting bigger. I don't know if that's my chest getting bigger or I'm just too fat. But the reality is that I'm just so proud of you, man. And, University of Illinois has a gem in you, in your work. I know that SLU is going to, miss you. But I'll be happy that I'll be able to roll through and see you when I come down as often as I do. Brother, man, I know we said this already, but, I'd be remiss because, our one outside of our academic connection, again, we are connected through our brother Doug, man. And, I'm hoping his mom is watching. I'm hoping his wife is watching. And, I just want to let them know, and I'm sure you do too, that we love them. We're praying for them. I'm just going to throw up a drink. I know you ain't got no drink, brother.
I got some Coke.
You got some Coke? Okay. We got a drink to our brother Doug Carradine, man. We love you and rest in power, brother.
Cheers.
So look, man, ladies and gentlemen, we have had a great time with an up-and-coming scholar. As you can tell, like he ain't playing about this, right? He ain't, as my granddaddy used to say, he ain't cracking, he facking, right? I mean, he telling the truth about this stuff. And I'm just excited to call you friend and brother, man. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bailey. I appreciate it. Good.
God bless you. God bless you. Ooh, that was all right, wasn't it?
What? It was more. He was speaking like fire shot up in his bones.
Well, we just gonna get right to it. We ain't gonna take no breaks because if I start thinking about it, and when I think about Jesus
and all that he's done for me,
let me not do that. So look, man, I got to move. That's just the thing about being on TV. You got to stay focused. We ain't really on TV though, so really I could stretch it out. But we gonna do this, man, because we have another highly acclaimed scholar. She's a social justice activist. I'm sorry if I'm being sort of, my head keeps swiveling. There's students everywhere, right? Like I said, we're on the campus of Wittenberg University and students are just everywhere. And I'm just kind of like, wow, they're here and I'm watching for masks and everything else, right? But anyway, I'm sorry. To my audience, we have a phenomenal scholar, a social justice activist. She is the associate professor of history and gender studies at the University of Indiana in Bloomington. I am a huge fan of hers, and I ask my Straight No Chaser fans to help me to welcome Dr. Amrita Chakrabarti Myers. Hey, lady.
Hey, Dr. Bailey, how are you?
All right. I am so glad to have you here. I know you just came off vacation. You feeling all right?
I'm feeling great. Just
good. I see you looking refreshed and
One small thing. I teach at Indiana University, not University of Indiana.
Oh, sorry, Indiana University.
I know my people here are gonna just
get mad at me.
Right? They're gonna cringe because that happens a lot to us.
Does it? So, is there an Indiana University though?
It is Indiana University.
No, I'm sorry. Is there a University of Indiana though?
No, there's not.
Okay. So like I said, Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. I had the city right. I knew where you was at. I'm down there. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. but good. So you had a good vacation. You ready to sort of do what fall gonna do, huh?
Let's not talk about fall yet.
Okay.
I'm in denial.
Okay. I understand that. And we're going to give a shout out to all professors later on here. But Miss Tisa is, my co-host today, and she wants to say hello to you too.
Good morning, Doc. How are you?
Good morning. I'm wonderful. Good to
Great.
see you. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm very excited.
Yeah, you look so at peace.
I'm still channeling being on the lake up in Michigan, where I was up until just yesterday.
Yes.
I still have my lake glow.
That's what it is.
Actually, Miss Tisa and some of her friends and colleagues did a weekend rejuvenation, motivation, yoga, and
In the garden.
In the garden
Yeah.
here in the city. They turned the city to a garden, and they found their peace right in the midst of the storm. So she knows all about it. So you want to ask her about that Cardi B thing?
So did you get a chance to check out that WAP and its many tensions as you were on the lake?
I did. I didn't realize that I was supposed to pour myself a libation before I got on the show. Julius didn't tell me that y'all were, living it large like that. Otherwise, I would have poured myself some bourbon before I got on the show.
I try to be responsible. I don't want my friends to follow in my footsteps.
Oh, look, I have done shows before. I will not say which ones, but I have done shows before where I've been told that I have to drink. I come carrying my own stash. But yes, while I was sitting on the dock of the bay, I did watch WAP a couple of times, and I watched the video, and then I watched the uncensored lyrical version as well, because I actually teach a show, and I think Dr. Bailey knows this. I teach a class. You would think that I had been drinking, my goodness. And I have not. I teach a class. I teach several classes here. I'm a Black women's historian, but I teach a class called Wenches, which is welfare queens. And it's the subtitle is Stereotypes and Images of Black Women in American History. And one of the units is, it is obviously about the stereotypes and images that have been created about Black women in the US, and how Black women have fought back against those stereotypes and images, and obviously taken control of their bodies, of their lives, and pushed back against how the US has attempted to control their bodies and their images across time and space. And one of those units is about hip hop culture, rap music, popular culture in general. And we talk about, Queen Latifah, Salt and Peppa, Beyonce, Nicki Minaj. And of course, I'm going to actually incorporate WAP right into that. I have to. But we also talk about, masculinity, and male rappers. We talk about Nelly, NWA. We talk about tip drill. And one of the things that I think is really important to talk about is there's been a lot of, I think, hypocritical discussion by men about this particular song, the video, and pushback about Cardi B's past life as a sexual entertainer, et cetera, et cetera. And I have a lot of problems with that. I think it's hypocritical, because unless these same men were not watching Two Live Crew and Nelly and NWA and salivating over, the soft porn of tip drill, unless they were not objectifying the Black women in those videos, the women who didn't get paid to do those videos, then they have no right to be pointing fingers and wagging their tongues about Black women and women in general taking control of their bodies, taking control of their sexuality, and saying, look, we are no longer interested in men objectifying us. It's not about the male gaze. It's not about them touching us, objectifying us, talking about us. It's about us saying, it's about sex positivity. It's about us saying we enjoy sex, we like sex. It's okay for us to talk about it. If men, for centuries, men have been able to talk about sex, enjoy sex, claim sex, and no one looks down on them and says, oh, you know, you're the S word or the B word or the H word or anything like that. It's so, in fact, if as a man, if you didn't like sex, then there was something wrong with you. You were effeminate, right?
Right.
But if women talked about sex or enjoyed sex or liked sex, then they were looked down on, they were slut shamed.
Right.
And now this generation is saying, no, it's okay to like sex, talk about sex, enjoy sex. There's nothing wrong with that. And so I opened up a thread on my Facebook page and said, let's talk about this. Let's be civil to each other, whatever our opinions are, but let's talk about it. And a lot of the brothers on the feed talked about it and said, yeah, you know, and at first I was uncomfortable, but then I realized in my past, I was watching Two Live Crew and Nelly and NWA, and I don't have a right to talk about these things. It's misogynistic of me to feel this way. Yes, I have a daughter. But, you know, if I'm not willing to sit down and talk to my son about being respectful towards women, then I don't have a right to sit down and talk to my daughter. Right. I should talk to both of my sons and my daughters about being respectful, respecting themselves, but also respecting other people. Right. It's about respect working both ways. And so this is really the conversation that we need to have. And I'm like, if you're worried about one song and one video destroying your children's morals, you're not doing a very good job as a parent. Let's be really clear. So we need to have a much larger engaged discussion. And let's be clear, these songs aren't about for your children in the first place. These songs are for grown people. So there's a larger conversation we need to be having about hip hop culture. And again, if you're not concerned about a lot of these rappers who are out there talking about killing people and putting a cap in people's heads, again, you've got a problem. So, I mean, I'm much more concerned about Black men who are out there rapping about calling women bees and hoes than I am about women taking control of their own bodies and sexualities, right? It's really about respect working in both ways across the board.
No, that's real. I mean, that's real, and that's fundamentally a part of what we have to engage in, both as academics, but also as parents and responsible men. You know, and you're right. You know, I hear brothers all the time about what if that was your daughter, and what if that was your daughter, and sort of rearing a sort of yeah. And it is kind of hypocritical and duplicitous. So I'm with you on that. And the one thing I would say about Cardi B, though, right, is that she's even remember in her twerk song, right? I mean, it was just all women on the boat, right? I mean, Cardi's doing this for her, right? She's doing this for women, and so that's good.
Right. There's no men in these videos. The men are not touching the women. They're not looking at the women. It's about women doing it for themselves, and that's what I think we really have to understand. Like, it's not about the pornographic gaze. It's about women talking about we enjoy this, we like this. It's not about the men.
Right. And yeah, that's no question. And so, certainly, I do believe that lyrics have meaning, but I also know that so does art. And so, the question becomes, as you say, it is an adult form of entertainment. And there's a lot of things that we can talk about, but we know how, you're an academic on a lot of different levels. And so I thank you for that sort of engagement as it relates to sex positivity and its relationship to this historic sort of a duplicitous relationship that some of us brothers have when it comes to that. Because like I said, I mean, when Trina and Trick Daddy was ain't no nan, what I'm saying? We was like, hey, what I'm saying? And I was like, and even now, like, everybody doing the, on the TikTok, and they got the Out West challenge, the Out West dance. And I heard the Out West song one day, right? What I'm saying? Kick it out west. You know what I'm saying? And I heard the lyrics like, whoa, dude tripping. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, so that's just kind of, so I thank you for that. Hopefully this will stir some more conversation amongst our viewers. Let's move to some big news yesterday, right? Kamala Harris was the pick, right?
Kamala Harris, yeah.
Yeah, Kamala Harris was the pick. And what does that do for you and your Democratic energies?
You're assuming that I'm a registered Democrat.
No, I'm just a Democratic small d. Right? Small d. The energies is not big D. The energies of representational democracy, of people involved in and being involved and represented within this thing called America.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure what the exact question is that you're asking me, Dr.
I mean, some people argue, right? Some people have argued, and we don't have to get into this, but some people argue that having a Black woman was important for the trajectory of America's sort of representation. I mean, for the representation of America, right? Given that women of color have not been, at least within the two-party candidate system, have not been at that level of vying for the top spot in America. Some people have argued this was a necessary, and even brothers, came out last week saying that, listen, he has to do this, or there'll be some blowback. So I was just wondering, do you agree that the positioning of her as a vice president candidate, sort of does a lot when it comes to, what it means to represent at this level for Black women, period?
Sure. I mean, obviously, for those of us who are historians, we know that Black women have been involved in these positions. I mean, Shirley Chisholm, right? This is what I've been thinking about for a while now. But in representative within the two-party system,
right,
Kamala Harris's nomination is certainly very significant. I, of course, was wondering why not, for those of us who are more politically progressive, right? Mm-hmm. Because you did mention in my introduction that I'm a social justice activist. Mm-hmm. So for those of us who are more politically progressive, I was wondering, right, why not Stacey Abrams, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. I wasn't necessarily surprised that, mm-hmm. I mean, many of us were suspecting that he was going to nominate a Black woman because look at the moment that we're in the summer of 2020. It's not just COVID, but we are in the midst of a serious, racial political crisis. I mean, the uprisings that we've seen this summer, I mean, people are talking about the fact that they haven't seen anything like this since the 1960s. And in fact, it doesn't even look like the 1960s when you consider not only the sheer numbers of the uprisings, but the actual demographics of the uprisings in terms of the ethnic and racial integration of the uprisings. When you consider not only how many white people have joined the uprising, but the working class nature of those demographics, when you consider how many people of all different backgrounds have come together to protest this summer, how long those protests have gone on, and the strength of those protests. The fact that major corporations, universities have come on board so incredibly, almost overnight, quickly since the murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, and others. And of course, we're still waiting for Breonna Taylor's murderers to be brought into custody.
Right.
So it's a very, 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 very unique moment in our nation's history. And so it's not surprising that Biden decided that it was politically necessary at this moment to choose a Black woman as his running mate. Kamala Harris is incredibly educated. She has a long political history. I'm not taking anything away from her in terms of her education, her talent, her experience, any of those things. But she is hardly a political progressive. And she's, her background makes her incredibly, she's not even a centrist. When it comes to law and order, she's very right of center. She's been, some people would say that she's been becoming more politically progressive over time as she's served in the Senate. Right. And so she's very, very much, she reminds me very much of Obama when you consider how he behaved in terms of, when you look at his record on drones, when you look at how he set up, his policies on immigration, border patrols. People forget that much of the infrastructure that Trump built upon was actually set up by the Obama administration, right? Yeah, and so Kamala Harris is actually very, very centrist, or actually right of center. She's a Black woman, but she's hardly a progressive.
No,
and so it's really, really, yes, if we have a young, Black woman, with an older white man, but this is not a leftist ticket. Let me just make that very, very clear for somebody who's been doing social justice activist work for 6 years, right? This is not a leftist ticket, but we are a two-party system and we don't have choices, right? We just don't have choices. And so do we have to get out and vote because we are caught between a rock and a hard place? We absolutely do. But we have to think from the ground up, from the local level politically, and we must start to institute change from the local level up if we want to see real change.
Right. And so I think that's why, I'm excited about your political work and the way that you do the grassroots organizing and mobilizing that you do. I mean, because we see that sort of that groundswell that you talked about, that you're noticing in this current moment. We saw it right in the election of Cori Bush in Missouri, right? And so when we think about her background from her organizing in 2014 with Mike Brown in St. Louis to now being a part of that squad in Congress, right? Here in my area, like we're trying to fight for the two sisters to join that squad. We have a Vanessa Enoch and a Desiree Timms here in the Dayton, Xenia, Cincinnati area. Two sisters who we're trying to get into the House of Representatives to sort of join it, all of which are part of that groundswell grassroots movement that you're talking about. So I do think that you're right. The energies are there. I do think that the two-party system does create a challenge when we talk about it in entire United States and the ability to sort of carry the electoral college and that kind of stuff. But, we certainly can say that there are wins, and there have been wins, and there continue to be wins for those organizers like you and the ones that I mentioned who are out there putting their bodies on the line. And so I thank you for what you do. And I thank you for supporting, the sisters and brothers who are out there in these streets doing their thing, who then choose to go about the business of representative democracy and running for office.
Absolutely. One thing I would really encourage people is to not just focus every 4 years on the presidential race. That's really foolish. People forget to vote for school boards, right? They forget to vote in their local elections, right? For city council, mayoral races. These are critical. I mean, federal elections are not just the be all and end all. I mean, one thing that we forget, we didn't just get here overnight, right? The Republicans shifted far to the right and became something that we don't even recognize today because they went this way slowly over time from, Tea Party onwards. They built it from the ground up through local elections. And that's how they changed their party into something that we don't even recognize today. If we want to change our system, we've got to be willing to do the same thing from the ground up, and we have to support our local people.
That's real. That's real. So let's get to, we don't have that much time left, but let's get to your work, right? The exciting work on Julia Chin, right? We know that, I always say we know that the institution of slavery, sort of as brutal as it was, it sort of did not look the same, right, across all the slave-holding states, and even plantation to plantation, right? They looked differently. And we know, like, for instance, some slaves could marry. We know some slaves could. We know some slaves couldn't learn to read. We know some slaves were able to read. There's a lot of differences across sort of the slave period. We also know, though, and here's where I want to get to your work. We also know that there were complicated interracial relationships, if you will, that put a wrench into everything, as we know, of sort of normal or sort of slave master relationships, right? Many obviously know the Jefferson Heming story, but your work is on the Johnson Chin story of the early 19th century. Can you talk a little bit about Julia Chin and this sort of complicated web of authority, place, and rights through enslavement?
Sure. No, I appreciate you giving me a few minutes to talk about that. I often go back and forth between the archive and the internet and the newspapers of the 18th and 19th century and the present. And I think to myself, I don't know if much has actually changed. And sometimes it's very, it can be very disheartening, actually. I literally was reading the newspapers on microfilm in 2016 in Lexington, Kentucky. And in July of 2016, when we had, right, the murders of Ahmaud Arbery and Philando Castile, and then the slaughter happened in the Pulse nightclub. And I thought to myself, I really didn't feel like much had changed in terms of, right, the racial disparities and just the things that were happening in what I was reading in the papers on microfilm and what was happening in the current moment. Between, you know, what has changed, little has changed. It's like nothing has changed and everything has changed in some ways. So the book that I'm finishing and that will hopefully be out sometime next year is called The Vice President's Black Wife: Resurrecting Julia Chin, and it takes place in Kentucky. And it's not fiction; it's actually a real story.
Right.
And so Julia Chin lived from roughly 1790 to 1833, and she was involved for 23 or so years with the man who became the 9th Vice President of the United States, Richard Mentor Johnson. And we don't know exactly how old she was because we don't know exactly when she was born because of slavery. And she was probably, from the best what I've been able to piece together of her life, she was about 14 years old, we think, when she became sexually involved with Richard Johnson. And she was originally owned by his parents, Robert and Jemima Johnson, and he inherited her, right? His father gave her to him along with about 100 other laborers when Richard ended up, right, creating his own plantation. The Johnsons were super, super wealthy. They were like, we would today call them the one percenters.
Right.
You know, they owned thousands, tens of thousands of acres of land in Kentucky. They had come out from Virginia. They were amongst the first settlers to help settle the territory. They were attorney generals, politicians, lawyers. You know, they were very, very prominent. So she was about 14. He was in his 30s. And people in the local area to this day like to portray it as a love story. I am not writing this as a love story because I don't have, first of all, I'm a historian, not a Harlequin romance author. And second of all, we don't have, even though she was literate and there were letters by her and her two daughters, none of those letters have survived. And so everything that's been pieced together from my end, archival sources, is by Richard and other white folks, and census materials, tax records, et cetera. It's been a painstaking process over a period of a decade to put this story together. But since I don't have materials from her hands saying, I loved this man, I'm certainly not going to say that it was a love story. And I also think that when you have power dynamics that are involved in slavery, that it's very, very difficult to talk about love. Right. Yes, they were together for 23 years. Yes, they had 2 children together. And unlike Hemmings and Jefferson, Richard Johnson never hid his relationship with Julia Chin. They openly lived together. He openly claimed her as his wife. He openly claimed their 2 children as his wife. Everyone in the area knew about the relationship. He lived in DC for half the year because he was a politician. He was a congressman, a senator, and then eventually vice president. Everyone knew that Julia, when he was away, Julia ran the plantation. She carried the keys to the plantation. She had access to his accounts and his money, right? Lines of credit. She oversaw all the other enslaved laborers on the plantation. She was, for all intents and purposes, Mrs. Johnson. They even apparently had a marriage ceremony. Of course, it wasn't legal because Kentucky didn't recognize interracial relationships or slave and free marriages. But he called her his wife, and everybody
Right.
else recognized her as such. So she had a lot of power and a lot of authority, but it's important to realize he never legally freed her,
Okay.
right? So even though she had all this power and all this authority, he never legally freed her. He owned her until the day she died. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind,
Okay.
that despite all the money and the power and everything else, I mean, he educated their daughters. They had good, he married them. They had good marriages when they grew up. He transmitted to them property and on land and money. There's all of these there's these tensions, right? That the daughters are literate, the daughters are educated, the daughters have money and power and land. They grow up to be free people. But Julia lives this very interesting, very strange life with power and authority on one hand, but limits on the other because she's never free and she dies enslaved.
Right.
And so that's what the book is about, is these tensions and these limitations and lines of power and privilege, and where do the lines end in terms of her power and privilege. That's what the whole book is about, is where does she not get to cross over into, where do those lines of power and privilege end for her in rural Kentucky? They don't live it's not Charleston, it's not New Orleans. This is, Blue Spring Farm outside of Georgetown, Kentucky. And I've been there. I've lived there during the summers. I've walked the land where she used to live. I've gone to the church where she used to worship, which is a church that Richard's parents helped to found, a tiny Baptist church called Great Crossing Baptist Church. And so it's a book that tries to bring her and her daughter's lives back into the center of American history and tell her story.
Thank you. Thank you. Time has just kind of moved on us so fast. But again, we have been enjoying the academic prowess and just genius, of your work. And I mean, I know your previous book also, sort of is something that those of us who appreciate history and appreciate slave history and the relationship of Black women in those periods, we just appreciate everything that you do. And so, I don't know, you said you're expecting it to come out next year?
That's the plan. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the plan. I mean, the manuscript is done at this point. It's just my agent and I are working to place it with the right press.
Right. Well, I am so grateful to have had you on, Dr. Myers. And we just, I know you have all your Indiana University people who are excited to have you as a mentor, as a teacher. I'm excited to call you friend and colleague. And we just thank you for your time here on Straight No Chaser. I would probably ask you, we have a couple questions, but time is just not our friend today. So we would probably ask you, I'll send you those questions, or they're in the feed, and maybe you can answer those questions within the feed because we're live right now. And so, but I'll send you those questions. It's also in the feed if you don't mind responding at your leisure.
Oh gosh, I didn't even realize all of the comments in the feed. Oh my word.
So thank you so much. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me on the show, Dr. Bailey. It's been a pleasure.
Bless you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have, it's been a rich conversation.
Very much so.
Intellectually aggressive, just the breadth of the conversation, right? Black Jesus, WAP, history of religion, understanding slavery, just so much. And I'm just proud to just have people who take education seriously.
Right.
As we are engaged now into fall 2020, schools across America wrestling whether that they can open or not open at every level. Who's suffering? Our children. Yes. Who's suffering? Our ability to sort of educate them in the best ways possible. Obviously, we have people with influence can be able to do certain things that people that don't have influence can't. And so, I just want to give this moment. This is our I'll drink to that segment. Time is not our friend right now, so we have to do a hard out here. But, as you see, my shirt said books saved my life. I think about the word book, and it got BOO first, boo. So books are my boo.
Okay.
You know, I got that from A.D. Carson, right? He said B-O-O and add a K to it, right?
There it is.
And so books is his love. And for all of you in the audience who love books, who love knowledge, who thirst for being, who broadening who you are through reading, we're going to drink to you as Straight No Chaser. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time today. As we close out this week, we have one more week to go before we take a 2-week break and go into season 2. So if you've watched this and you like it, please share it. Please tell a friend. And as we say every time, we thank you for supporting Straight No Chaser. God bless you. Take care. Stay strong.